Hey, it's the beginning of the work week and the perfect time to have this conversation. Center City's office buildings have struggled to bounce back from the pandemic. One reason is just that the way we work has changed. I'm speaking with Philadelphia Inquirer's real estate reporter Jake Blumgart about the current state of Center City office buildings, why their value and occupancy is so much lower than before the pandemic, and what this all can mean for Philly. It's Monday, October 6th. I'm Trinae Ree, and here's what Philly's talking about. So we were recently at this big office building downtown for an interview a few months ago, and it was at a major law firm in the city. It was a nice office space, but it was the middle of the week, and there was like one person there. And we had this huge conference room for ourselves. So is that what it's like to go to an office in Center City these days?
I think, it definitely depends office to office. And it also depends like which day. Like on a Friday, I would say in a lot of offices in Center City and in the suburbs too. It's not just in Center City. If you go in on a Friday, there's often nobody there.
Right.
And honestly, like Mondays are still pretty thinly populated as well. I mean, honestly, I am speaking to you right now from my home. It's a Monday and I'm not in my office. Whereas in the middle of the week, I will be in the office. And that is kind of the pattern that we're still seeing. The kind of hybrid work wars have like quieted down to some extent. And we've kind of like resulted in a bit of an equilibrium where the kind of 3 days in office, 2 days at home has kind of stuck, even though a lot of offices, or a lot of companies, I should say, still sometimes require more days in the office, but that's not always being followed to the letter, I would say.
Right. So it's like a mix, it seems like.
Yeah.
So what's the occupancy rate of office buildings downtown these days?
So as I recall, the vacancy rates in both Center City office buildings and office buildings in the suburbs is still about 20%, which is quite high. And essentially in all the post-pandemic years, we've had vacancy levels that have, you've been talking to an office broker in like 2018 about vacancy levels like that, they would have been alarmed. And now everyone's kind of gotten a bit used to it. And it's important to note there are a lot of office buildings that are actually very well occupied. There are, in the post-pandemic era, a kind of tranche of trophy buildings that are, in the 90 percentile, close to 100% occupied. And that's like largely because as people have shrunk their office needs, because it's rare they have all their workers in the office at the same time, they are kind of concentrating in smaller offices that are more expensive and
Like higher end.
exactly.
Okay.
And so those office buildings are doing great. It's kind of the office buildings in the rung or two below that are really hurting.
Got you. So some companies, they're still in Center City, but they're just shrinking their footprint.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I would say, yeah, most have shrunk their footprint. Now, there is some chatter in like office market circles that a lot of people shrunk their footprint after the pandemic and now are kind of like, ooh, geez, like maybe we shrank a little too much. So we will
Okay.
kind of see over the next year or two whether some of the companies whose office leases are coming up, decide to like grow their footprint a bit. But for the most part, the trend is definitely downward.
Okay, so let's get into the finances here. How much is an office building downtown going for in 2025 compared to the years prior to the pandemic?
So, yeah, it's really interesting. There's been a number of office buildings that have sold in the last year or two, but this summer there were a couple that sold for like between 30 and 40 million dollars, which is really not very much for one of these huge center city office buildings. And in their previous times they were sold, in one case, it was more than 2 times that amount in like 2018. And in another case, it hadn't sold since like 2006. But the price that it sold for in 2006 was much higher than the one it sold for in 2025. And adjusted for inflation, that's a huge reduction.
Hmm.
So, yeah, there's a lot of office buildings that are trading at steep discounts, which is essentially attracting a bunch of people who never would have thought about buying a Center City office building in the past. And that includes, people who are trying to convert them into apartments, and also just some people from like outside the market who've, never been involved in Philadelphia before and now see an opportunity to scoop up these buildings on the cheap.
Now, tell me about the Center City office building at 20th and Market or 2000 Market Street.
Right. So that's one of the ones that I was describing that was sold at a deep discount. And it was sold to out of town investors. And essentially, they're keeping it all as office. They're not one of the ones who are converting to residential, but they've essentially like bought it for so cheap that they're able to invest a lot of money into it to like make it nicer in the kind of hopes of it becoming one of these like winners in the office market, kind of turning it into more of like a trophy building. And essentially, because they were able to save so much money on the upfront purchase price, they have like more capital that they can invest into like the amenities and like tailoring the space to like a particular like user. So you can come to like law firm X or tech company Y and be like, oh, do you want, I don't know, like a bank of phone rooms, or like, I don't know, any number of like little tweaks and amenities that you could tailor to that specific user, and you've got that money to like do that.
Interesting. Do you know some of the amenities? Like you said, like a phone bank room, maybe like, I don't know, swinging chairs or something. I don't know, or like a gym. That would be great.
Yeah,
What kind
yeah.
of amenities are these office buildings providing?
You know, it's interesting. I mean, I kind of want to take this from the perspective of my job, which is like the office we had during, when going into the pandemic. It was perfectly nice. But it
And this is
definitely,
the office that you guys had at the now police station, or
oh, no,
even,
no,
or
no,
the one on
no.
Market Street.
The one on Market Street. Yeah,
Got
yeah.
it. Okay.
But it was just like, it was a little run down. It didn't like feel, it was a little dark. It was like a little, it just like, like you went to work there and it was, it was fine, but it wasn't like,
It wasn't
it,
inspiring.
it wasn't inspiring. And you could tell it wasn't, the top of the line. And now we're in the Roman Haas building near Independence Hall, and it's just a much more attractive office building. So I don't actually know the details of our office lease, but I don't know if they like tailored it to us specifically, but it is a smaller square footage, and but you can really tell the upgrade. You can really feel it being in there. It just like feels like a modern place of business in a way that our previous one did not so much.
Got you.
And I think that's like a lot of the changes that people, like office buildings require like constant like maintenance and work to keep them up to stuff, essentially. And especially when you're changing users. And a lot of office building owners in these post pandemic years have been facing a lot of financial struggles, and they have not been able to keep office buildings up. Those non top tier office buildings up, I mean. And so this is kind of giving some like new folks an opportunity to come in and make those changes.
Then there's the famous Wanamaker building across from City Hall. Macy's recently closed on its bottom floors. What's going on upstairs?
Yeah, so that's huge. I mean, this has been it is one of the largest office buildings in Philadelphia. It has been having just monumental challenges in the post-pandemic era, just like vacancy rate surging. And I think it's close to 1 million square feet overall, but I don't think it's all of that is office, but it's an enormous block of office space. And so they were really, you know, just tenants were leaving there really rapidly after the pandemic. And because it's so big, it's going to be really challenging to convert to residential. So people were really worried about the future of the building. Would it just sit vacant forever? Would it, fall into the hands of somebody who had big ideas but wasn't able to follow through? And instead, TF Cornerstone, which is a big deal New York City developer that has a lot of experience redeveloping historic buildings into new uses. They're the ones who now own the whole building. And this is a really good sign for the future of the Wanamaker building and for that part of Center City, because these guys are not, some fly by night operator. They like really know what they're doing. They're also partnering with a local developer, Altera Property Group, who has a very good rep and is definitely one of the top developers in the city. So essentially, what they're doing, they're keeping a couple floors of it as office. They're going to turn the former Wanamaker space into, it's not completely nailed down yet, but a kind of like newly formatted retail environment, probably with multiple tenants because there's not any one tenant large enough to take up all that space. Then the rest of it, they're going to turn into apartments. And again, it's such a big building that it's a little tricky, but they've essentially got this vision for kind of like loft style apartments akin to the kind that you saw in some of the kind of industrial or like formerly industrial neighborhoods in like Manhattan, that have now been transformed into these like really fancy, condo loft style neighborhoods. So that's kind of what they're imagining for the Wanamaker building.
Interesting. We'll continue this conversation about downtown office buildings after the break. Okay, so what's really happening here? Why has the value of these office buildings plummeted? I think people would assume it's because office workers are still, doing the hybrid. They might be working from home or working in the office some days, and companies just don't need the same space as before. So the demand for these tall buildings with cubicles has dropped.
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially right. I mean, but again, with the caveat that there are a lot of Center City office buildings that are doing just fine. But there are, it's just the overall demand for office space has shrunk. And crucially, that could be addressed by attracting a bunch of new tenants from outside the Philadelphia market. So even if everyone's taking up less space, if you got a bunch of new entrants into the market, then these older buildings could still fill up. But Philly just like doesn't really attract a ton of new companies to Center City. And so we haven't like lost a bunch of companies during the pandemic, or I mean after the pandemic, but we also still aren't gaining them. Well, that also wasn't really happening before the pandemic. And you could, say that's kind of because of our, wage and business taxes and whatnot that are kind of unusual and kind of keep a lot of people in the suburbs and sometimes away from the region altogether. But yeah, so it's exactly what you're saying. It's, the office work has fundamentally changed, and there's just a lot of office buildings that are now have very large vacancy rates, and in some cases, a sky high vacancy rates, like to the extent they're just like not feasible really, even in their current iteration. Um, and yeah, those buildings aren't worth as much as they used to be.
Jake, can you like break down how an office building connects to Philly's school district?
So essentially, Center City office buildings, like most real estate in the city, pay property taxes. And because they're so big and worth so much money, the property tax bills that they contribute to the city and school district tax base are, a much bigger deal than if like, Joe taxpayer or whatnot, his home value falls and he's paying less in property taxes. And then also for the school district gets more of every property tax dollar than the city does. So it's a even bigger deal for the school district than it is for the city. And in addition to that, there's something called the use and occupancy tax, which is also based on the assessed value of the buildings. And that also all goes to the school district. So the school district essentially gets hit double by office building values falling. But it is also important to note that, like, especially for the city government itself, we do rely so much on the wage tax and some business taxes that, unlike a lot of cities, we don't depend as much on property taxes. And because, as I was kind of describing, our office sector has been kind of anemic, its office buildings are not as big a part of our tax base as they are in some other cities that have been much more successful in attracting a bunch of new companies and therefore building a bunch of new office buildings and whatnot. But again, we're not a rich city. Every dollar counts, and it's a little fuzzy on the exact amount of money, but probably we're talking about $10 million or so in addition to the losses we've already had a year. And we just have a lot of office buildings that are still assessed by the city as being their pre-pandemic values and have not kind of taken into account the plunge in valuation that we've been seeing these last couple of years, including, like, let's say 2000 Market, which you were talking about earlier, is still assessed by the city at over $100 million, and it recently just sold for like $30 million.
Mhm.
So we're going to lose a lot of money off that.
Well, Jake, does the Parker administration or city council have any proposals for bringing more life to these office buildings downtown? Or will the city consider incentives to attract office tenants, or I don't know, even like repurpose office buildings like you mentioned at Wanamaker, they're thinking of making into residential. Any fresh ideas?
In terms of the renovations of office buildings, there have been some ideas kicked around in terms of bringing the a property tax abatement and making that even larger than it is already to like incentivize developers to turn more of these office buildings into new uses. But I don't know if that's actually going to pass muster. I mean, the property, we already have a 10-year property tax abatement for buildings that are being renovated. And we already have very flexible zoning downtown. Like a lot of big cities post pandemic are trying to pass all these bills to make it easier to convert an office building to an apartment building. And we like don't really have to do that. Like that's already done, you know? Um, so honestly, I like don't even like the big picture like answer to your question, which is the kind of like perennial for like Philly business types. Is like, yeah, we could like try to do something about the wage tax and like all these business taxes we have, um, to try to attract more people to base their companies from downtown. But honestly, it's such a briar patch of a situation of just like most of the city's budget comes from those wage taxes. I mean, we have made some changes to the wage and business taxes recently. They are like falling a little bit, and they are going to fall, or some of the business taxes are going to fall a lot more in like 8 years. But I don't think the changes are radical enough to like really kind of like reverse some of these challenges we're having with the office market downtown.
Jake, when I was reading your article, I was like, okay, but what about the trickle down effect of all these changes to big office buildings downtown, especially in the food and hospitality industries that have been impacted by the current state of Center City office buildings, like lunch places, bars, restaurants that, relied on foot traffic and people stopping by for, some soup and salad and going to happy hours and things like that. How are they, factored in to all of this?
So I do think it's had an effect on those like small businesses in Center City. But I will say that a crucial distinction with Philadelphia Center City versus a lot of other downtowns in the United States is we had a large residential population before the pandemic. It's only growing, you know, um, especially with some of these office building conversions we've been talking about. You walk through Center City or like a lot of parts of Center City almost any day of the week, and there's a lot of people on the streets, you know? So it depends. It's like some of those buildings or small businesses that are really were targeted towards like middle of the day office workers, like the soup and salad crowd, like you were talking about, I think are like really having a problem. And some of them have gone out of business. But on the whole, it's not as bad as it is and has been in a lot of other American downtowns.
Another question I had, Jake, what are the key industries that are still occupying office space in Center City?
I mean, again, we haven't lost a lot of users. So it's like we still have a lot of law firms. Comcast, obviously, is huge. We've got some healthcare companies. So our office user mix is pretty similar to what it was pre-pandemic. There has been some, changes in like the federal workforce. Although we've also retained, earlier in the year, it really seemed like we were going to lose a lot of our federal office space. And with all the bizarre goings on with Doge and Elon Musk and whatnot, that has like not been as catastrophic so far as we were maybe anticipating back in like March, April. It is also worth noting, though, that we do have, as I was kind of talking about earlier, there's a lot of healthcare companies and like medical device companies and whatnot that are based in our suburbs. And again, that have never, or in recent years, have not been based in Philadelphia, not during the pre-pandemic boom, not now. And that's kind of like this like huge sector that we've just like haven't like really fully been able to attract into Center City. It's also worth noting that a lot of the universities had Center City footprints in like the in Center City office buildings, and almost all of them have retreated either back to their campuses or like Temple University recently bought one of the former UArts buildings and is going to move their operations there. So that's a kind of tenant that we haven't lost from the city of Philadelphia, but is kind of like largely gone from the office sector in Center City.
All right. Is there some hope that the market rebounds or changes in a lucrative way sometime soon?
I mean, I think, the fact a lot of the people I talked with for this article, it's not like they were hopeful per se, but they were like they think this is the bottom of the market. Like, it's probably not going to get worse. Like, part of the reason we're seeing more of these buildings sell is because people are like, you're never going to be able to buy an office building for as cheap as you can right now. So probably things are going to rebound, but are they ever going to rebound to the level that they were pre-pandemic? I don't know. That seems probably like less likely.
That's Jake Bloomgart, Philadelphia Inquirer's real estate reporter. Jake, thanks so much for joining me on CityCast Philly today.
Absolutely.
You can read more of Jake's reporting by clicking the link in our show notes. That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. Let us know what you think of this episode. Are you working a more hybrid schedule, or are you back in the office downtown working 5 days a week? Let me know. Also, rate the show, leave us a review, and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to sign up for our morning newsletter, Hey Philly, to learn more about what else Philly's talking about. And don't forget, you can support the show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Philly member at membership.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.